Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. We are live. My name is Michelle. I'm the outreach coordinator at Sexual Health Alliance, and I'd like to introduce you to Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm the Gender, Sexuality, and Relationship Diversity Content Specialist at the Sexual Health Alliance.
All right. So today we have a really interesting talk for you. We are going to be talking all about asexualities. We have a lot of questions. We're going to do like a Q&A format back and forth between Lee and myself. And feel free to put questions in the chat. We would love to hear from you. Questions, comments, thoughts, anything. We want this to be an interactive experience for you. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. Anything you want to mention before we get started, Lee?
I'll just mention that, it's no accident that we're doing this conversation this week, because this week, the last full week in October, is ACE week. ACE being short for asexual. The week was formerly known as Asexuality Awareness Week, now ACE week. So this is our attempt to contribute to the ongoing collective effort of raising awareness about asexualities and keeping those conversations going. So let's do it.
Wonderful. All right. So I will be checking the event chat throughout the event. So I'll be on the lookout for your questions, everyone. All right. So let's start with our first question. What's the difference between asexuality and just not desiring sex?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of times when people think about asexuality, like break down the word, A means no or without, sexuality, sex. So no sex, without sex. And you might think that as a result, people who are asexual are people who just have no interest in sex, don't desire sex at all. And I can understand why people would think that, but it's misleading. Instead, the way that we want to think about asexuality is not in terms of desire, right? Let's separate desire from attraction, and let's separate both desire and attraction from behavior, right? Those are different things. They influence each other sometimes, but we can separate them and they can independently vary. So if someone has no sex ever, does that make them asexual? Nope. Right? They might completely abstain from sex, or they might be asexual and have tons of sex every day. That's coherent, as you'll see. Desire, like libido, yeah, asexual folks can have that. Because what makes you asexual is that you have little to no sexual attraction toward other persons, right? So you look at people and you don't get that little magnetic draw to them where you're like, I want to have sex with that person. That person is attracting me to them and sort of instilling in me some sexual desire. So to be asexual is to just have little to no sexual attraction that sort of affects the way that you interpret your experiences, your relations to others, how you move through the world. You might be in a situation where you have little to no sexual attraction toward other persons, but still experience sexual desire. So an example of that would be like, imagine you go to the fridge and you're looking for something to eat because you're hungry, but you open up the fridge and nothing looks good. Right? There you have desire, but you're not sort of attracted to anything in that fridge. That's the position some asexual folk find themselves in. And asexual folk, even in the lack of attraction, might still act on their desire. Right? You might still engage in sex for a number of reasons, even in the absence of sexual attraction, because it feels good, or because it's something to do and you're bored, or because it's a way of bonding with your partner, or because it's a form of physical exercise, it burns calories or whatever, right? So yeah, someone might have a low libido and be asexual. They might have a low libido and be not asexual. They might be asexual and have a low libido. They might be asexual and have a very, very, very high libido. Lots of options here.
Yes, and I love that refrigerator analogy. I think that really puts it in a good perspective. I like that.
Yeah,
All right, so
cool.
let's move on to our next question. All right, so why asexualities and not just asexuality?
Yeah. So there's more and more talk about asexuality, and that's great, right? It used to not even be talked about at all, but now we know that it's about 1.7% of the population, at least, right? But we might think that 1.7% of the population, that there is this new orientation, You got your bisexuals, you got your pansexuals, you got your people who are straight, your people who are gay, and then you got your aces. But I don't think that's the most helpful way of looking at it. I don't think
Okay.
we should think of asexuality as just another point on that spectrum of who we're attracted to, but instead, asexuality introduces a whole new axis, right? So
Mm.
let's contrast asexuality with what we can call allosexuality. So allo is a prefix that means other. Someone is allosexual to the degree that they do experience consistent sexual attraction toward other persons. Right? So, what do gay folk, straight folk, pan folk, bi folk all have in common? They're all allosexual because they
Mhm.
all experience sexual attraction toward other persons. But now imagine that line turning into a square, right? So, you might be, in a sense, say bisexual, but you might fall on this vertical line between asexual and allosexual anywhere along that spectrum, if you can kind of visualize that, right? So
Yeah.
we talk about asexuality and allosexuality as forming its own spectrum. And there's lots of ways that you can fit onto that spectrum, right? So there's lots of ways of being asexual, which is why I prefer to use the term asexualities. To give some examples, there's folks who experience no sexual attraction ever,
Mhm.
but they still love sex, as we mentioned a moment ago. There's some people who experience no sexual attraction ever, and they're repulsed by sex.
Mhm.
It's not to say that they're sex negative in a political social sense, but it's to say that just like I don't like olives, they don't like sex. I don't want to
Yeah.
ban olives. I don't dislike people who like olives, but
Yeah.
but then there's also people who fluctuate, right? Where it comes and goes. And sometimes people use the term ace flux for that, right? Or they might call themselves gray ace or gray sexual. And then, of course, we've got the population of folks who identify as demisexual. So, demi is a prefix that means half. And a demisexual would be someone who experiences sexual attraction to someone at a psychological and physiological level only after a certain sufficiently strong bond has formed. Right? And
Mm.
that's not the same as just waiting till marriage. It's not the same as being picky. It's that you actually don't have an arousal response until you formed a bond with that person.
Yeah.
So in that sense, that person, it kind of straddles the line between asexual and allosexual. It's kind of circumstantial based on the connection to the person. So as you can see, once we start thinking of asexuality to allosexuality as its own spectrum, there's so many points and so many different lenses we could adopt in order to interpret our experience, and labels we can use to try to communicate to each other about how we experience the world, what we're looking for, that I think just talking about asexuality is itself a little bit oversimplified. It's a little bit reductive. We've
Mhm.
got asexualities. There's a whole buffet of them.
Yeah, and I am so glad that we're talking about this today because honestly, I don't know that much about it. And I thought it was just, oh, if you're asexual, you're just not interested in sex. And I
Yeah,
thought it was along the same spectrum as just, it's how you identify, whether like you identify as gay or straight or bi or whatever, so I'm glad we're talking about this because there's a lot to learn.
absolutely. So, like for me myself, I would identify as the term that I would use is I'm a sapphically oriented arrow ace, right? And you know, is that like some term that's like imprinted on my soul, some objective fact about me? I don't think so. It's a term that I use to help communicate a very complex human experience. It's a lot like the way we use music genre labels, right?
Yeah.
But to say that I'm arrow ace is to say that I don't experience romantic attraction or sexual attraction toward other persons. But there's other kinds of attraction out there. There's emotional attraction, spiritual attraction, intellectual attraction, aesthetic attraction.
Mhm.
And to say that I'm sapphically oriented is to say that toward women and feminine presenting folks, I feel those kinds of attraction. So I still have an
Mhm.
oriented sense of attraction. It's just not sexual or romantic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and once
That's such a
people sort of allow themselves to start using this more enriched language and conceptual framework, we get a much more detailed self-understanding, and we're allowed to explore so many more relationship possibilities. It's really freeing.
yes. Yes, I know. Like, a lot of times we're just taught to look at things in like a black and white manner, and now like there's so many more ways to describe your experience and how you feel about your sexuality and towards others. And it's very freeing.
Absolutely, and, like, I used that word "lens" a minute ago, and I'm very particular about that. Like, I like to think of all of these terms less as labels and more as lenses, because what do lenses do? They help us see more clearly. They help the world be easier to
Hmm.
navigate, right? And I think that's the role that these
Yeah.
words, like ace or aromantic or gray sexual, what have you, they function as lenses. And just like lenses, our prescriptions might change over time, right? So there might
Yeah.
be a time where I no longer, where the term asexual no longer serves me in navigating the world and clarifying my own experiences, in which case I'll change my prescription.
Yeah. Oh, I love that analogy. Keep those coming. Like, I love it.
Yeah.
So we have a comment from Brigetta. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Brigetta says this is such a great discussion. So I want to
Mhm.
thank you for your comment. I think it's a really good discussion.
Mhm.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to our next question. Okay. How does asexuality relate to aspects of relationship diversity, such as non monogamy and kink?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Because there's, again, this unfortunate stereotype by people who aren't ace, and also one that's often internalized by people who are ace, that asexual people, since they're not interested in sex sometimes, also aren't interested in relationships
Hmm.
or any kind of intimate exchange. And that's just not the case. You get on FetLife, which proceed with caution, you know, but you go to the group like Kinky Asexuals, and it's got over 5,000 members,
Wow.
right? And there are other groups like that. So when we think about kink and asexuality, we'll talk about that one first. Actually, I think a lot of asexuals, not like a lot in a sort of like proportionate sense, so I won't say most, but there's a significant number of aces who use kink as a way of connecting intimately with their partner and really exploring a sense of erotic embodiment that isn't necessarily what we would call conventionally sexual, right?
Hmm.
Now, once you start getting into kink, the lines between what counts as sex versus not sex, they get really blurry.
Mm.
um, I mean, they're blurry everywhere, but kink makes those lines pretty blurry. So, in my own experience, like what I'll say is I am asexual depending on what the person I'm talking to means by sex. So if they
Hmm.
mean something that's very sort of vanilla, very sort of like what traditional society thinks of as sex, I'm asexual. But if we're considering like a rope scene or an impact scene as sex, right? Then it's not clear. Then I might use the term pansexual, right? Because that term
Hmm.
sex is really shifty and shifts across context too, right?
Yeah.
But I know personally, and this is anecdotal, but so many uh, asexual folk who are into kink and BDSM, it's that way of exploring erotic power and intimate connection and that sort of owning an aspect of your sexuality through embodiment, but not necessarily through conventional sexual channels.
Hmm.
And then with non-monogamy, right? Sometimes when I tell people that I'm asexual and aromantic, but non-monogamous, they get really confused.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, do you just mean you have a lot of friends?" It's like, well, I do, uh,
I do.
but I also have people who are partners, right? So I alluded to this earlier, but it'd be good, I think, to spell it out a little bit. One of the really cool conceptual frameworks that is actually pretty old, we get it from the old German proto-sexologists, but it's been revived in more recent discussions of asexuality, especially over the last decade or so, is what we call the split attraction model. And the split attraction model tells us that attraction comes in many different flavors, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, there's spiritual, there's intellectual, there's aesthetic, sexual, romantic. Now, our dominant culture tends to smush all those together,
Hmm.
right? And if you're in a romantic relationship with someone, but you're not sexually attracted to them, that's seen as a problem
Right.
because there's this expectation that all those attractions should line up.
Mhm.
But in reality, we know that they don't, right? They're
Yeah.
independently variable. I can look at someone and be like, you are beautiful. I don't want to have sex with you. I just think you're beautiful. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, I think the sunset is pretty. I don't want to make love to the sunset, right?
Yes, yes.
It's aesthetically attractive. So asexual folk can experience all kinds of attractions and form bonds rooted in all kinds of attractions. So I have partners that are not romantic partners. They're not sexual partners, but they're partners that I'm aesthetically attracted to, partners who I have an intellectual and an emotional connection with,
Mhm.
and who we have a sort of intentional mutual investment that's intended to continue on indefinitely until someone opts out. I like to use the honorific partnership for that. If I have multiple of those, that's a non-monogamous situation, right?
Mhm.
And there's a real form of love that can build there. Love is bigger than romantic love. The notion of
Yeah.
romantic love was socially constructed in the recent past. It's not that old, right? And there's more to love than just sexual connection, right? You can absolutely have a robust sense of love without romance, without sexual connection. So it's absolutely possible for asexual folk to be absolutely non monogamous.
Yes, yes. All right, so let's go on to our next question. Why is it so important for sexuality professionals to learn more about asexualities?
Yeah, good question. Because I encounter like a lot of folks who really like this is all very new to them. And that's understandable because like it's only recently started to come into the public discourse. We are starting to see more ace representation on like Netflix shows, right? Thank you,
Mhm.
Yasmin Benoit, for your efforts on that. In case you, by any chance, happen to be hearing this, if y'all don't follow Yasmin, go follow Yasmin. Incredible asexuality educator, researcher, activist, and just a great human being. Um, but why is it important for sexuality professionals to learn more about sexual asexuality? You can't understand sexuality without understanding asexuality. Asexuality, insofar as it's a spectrum of human experience, if you are a sexuality professional and you are ignoring asexuality, you are ignoring a whole spectrum of your subject matter.
Mm.
And that's huge. And you might have noticed even just some of the vocabulary that we're using here, talking about, the ace spectrum, demisexual, talking about the split attraction model. These conceptual resources can be so helpful for helping advance sexuality research by helping us make more fine-grained and nuanced distinctions and clarifications, help us ask better questions, construct better surveys, and also better serve clients if we're the sort of sexuality professional who is client facing.
Mhm.
Because for example, someone might be struggling, say, with their sexuality, right? I went through this when I was much, much younger and living a very different life. And I thought I was a boy. I was like, well, I want to date men, but I don't want to sleep with men. So I don't understand. I'm really confused. If I had had the notion of the split attraction model, if my therapist at the time had been able to give me that, could have been like, oh, well, you have, since I thought I was a boy at the time, I would have said, oh, I'm heterosexual and biromantic.
Mhm.
Boom, suddenly I have a lens for self-understanding,
Yeah.
right? Suddenly I'm not broken or weird, but I have something to help stabilize. I have a conceptual framework to interpret my experiences in, to navigate my experiences in. That's so profoundly helpful for so many people. Right? So really all of this vocabulary and all of this understanding of asexuality should be in every helping professional's toolkit.
Mhm.
There's also the fact that historically asexual folk have been remarkably stigmatized. If someone is in the past asexual, they might have been diagnosed as like hyposexual in the sense of being a disorder, right? And
Mm.
then received treatment, right? They might have sort of, and that's oftentimes gendered too,
Mhm.
unfortunately, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And when you think about that, treating someone's asexuality as a disorder and trying to then make them, to use that term we used earlier, allosexual, to
Mhm.
make them experience that sexual attraction toward other persons. Let's call a spade a spade. That's a form of conversion therapy. That's trying to take someone's sexual orientation and change it into a different sexual orientation. And what we know is that conversion therapies are psychological violence, right? We don't want to do that to people. So having this
Mhm.
affirming paradigm where we recognize and depathologize and demedicalize asexuality, just like we did with homosexuality, right? It's such an important step. And fluency in that and the history of that, I would say, is necessary if we're going to work with like the full range of human experiences in our research or in our practices.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so important no matter where you're coming from, whether you're an educator or you're a sex therapist or counselor working with clients, that you have this base knowledge and that you understand so you don't accidentally do harm to someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it also makes us wonder, we've seen a lot of breakthroughs in our lifetimes, right? We've seen the increasing destigmatization of queerness in general. We've seen, in some senses, destigmatization of trans identities,
Hmm.
right? Legal, political, lots of stigma. But among mental health
Right.
providers, this is more and more the party line. Like, we practice affirming care. We see, in terms of neurodiversity, we're seeing this shift from this medical model to a neuro-inclusive paradigm, right? Asexuality is the same thing. And one curious question is, I really am excited to see what comes next. Like, what is
Yeah.
the next axis of human experience that we're going to crack open and realize that, oh, we've been unjustly pathologizing people all along. How can we be better moving forward? It's just really cool because we're on a roll. We've made so much progress, and it's really cool to even just
Right.
anticipate what might be next.
Right, and I feel like we're at this special time within the last few years especially. I feel like we're having a little bit of like a sexual revolution within like maybe within our country or our communities, and we're talking about sex more and we're talking about the human experience more and all of the different facets of that. And so yeah, I agree with you. I'm excited to see what comes next too.
Hell yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's go on to our next question. What is it like being an asexual sexuality professional?
Yeah, it's cool. It's weird, but it's cool. Um, So, as I mentioned, I am the gender, sexuality, and relationship diversity content specialist at the Sexual Health Alliance. Previously at Shaw, I was the LGBTQI plus curriculum coordinator. I've worked as an LGBTQI plus consultant and a sexuality consultant for another of other companies, both in the mental health field and outside. So, I've been working in this subject matter in human sexuality, gender for a long time. And I'm also asexual myself, right? So first, I want to say I think it's pretty cool that the Sexual Health Alliance has an ACE as their gender, sexuality, and relationship diversity content specialist. Not to pat myself on the back, but to pat
Yeah,
Shaw
I
on the
think
back.
so
I
too.
think that's pretty cool. Also to have a trans person, I think that's cool, right? Um,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because my perspective, both in terms of theoretical orientation and lived experience, is so different from a lot of sort of received sexuality stuff. And I like that because what it does is it gives me an ability to have a little bit of personal separation of it from it, I should say, which then gives enough
Mhm.
distance that we can more critically evaluate it, crack it
Yeah.
open and sort of see like, oh, wait, no, there is some real like problematic underlying dogmas here, right? Someone who doesn't have the lived experience as an asexual person might not see that, right? Because like it's not part of their radar, right? It's like, if you're an allosexual person, if you experience sexual attraction regularly, there's certain parts of sexual attraction you're going to take for granted, right? Because it's
Right.
just so normalized for you. For me, it's not normalized. It's something I don't quite understand, which gives me a more curious relationship to it, right? I also love being an asexual sexuality professional because, well, I study sexuality, and asexuality is a variety of sexuality. It's not to be contrasted with sexuality, despite the name. right? I have a very robust sexuality. It manifests as asexuality, right? And they say all research is me search. Getting to learn all about the complexities of human sexual behavior through this lens helps me understand myself so much better. And then I get to have really, really cool conversations like this.
Yeah.
And there's something so fun about being an educator in some of these contexts where I'll be like teaching a group of like 50 to 100 therapists. And one of them is like in the chat, I've never heard of any of this before, and I think I just discovered that I'm asexual. I love
Mhm.
those moments where like you've enriched someone's conceptual framework and vocabulary to the point where even though they've been in the field for a decade, they get new self-understanding. It's such a validating and like affirming and just really cool experience to like share that moment with someone.
Right. I mean, it's life changing, because sometimes you feel something about yourself is different and you don't really have a term for like what it is. And then somebody comes along and is like, here, this is it, and you get that moment and you're like, wow, okay, I feel it.
Yeah, and you can exhale so much stress, so much shame, because in our very medicalized society that pathologizes basically any deviation from a norm, someone who's lived their life not experiencing significant, consistent sexual attraction toward other persons, they might deeply struggle with that. They might think, I'm broken.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're not a broken allosexual. You are a perfectly well functioning asexual. And that
Yeah.
reframe can just be such a relief, such a weight off your shoulders and your heart. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to try to do something fancy here. We have a question and I'm going to see if I can show it. There is like a show button. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. We have a question. How do we support couples when there's one partner who is asexual and another who is not?
that's a really great question, right? So when we have these mixed relationships where there's one ace and one person who's allosexual, right? So it's, of course, going to depend on the couple, right? And it's going to depend on, for the asexual person, whether they find themselves sex repulsed, sex favorable, or sex neutral. And that's not the same as sex positive and sex negative. That's a different thing, right? But like I was mentioning earlier, some asexuals really, really like sex. Some asexuals really, really don't. And some could either take it or leave it, right? So you'd want to have that discussion with the asexual partner and kind of figure out where they fall on that, because that's going to inform your strategy moving forward. If they're very, very sex favorable and they're open and enthusiastic about having sex with their partner as bonding or as pleasure exchange because it feels good, then the discussion is, how do we navigate the sexual dynamic where there is an asymmetry in attraction, though not necessarily an asymmetry in desire, right? Because if you have a partner where you're like, look, I want to have sex with you, but I'm not sexually attracted to you, that can be a hurdle. So you can focus on that hurdle in particular and recognize that the fact that the partner isn't sexually attracted to you isn't any fault of yours. It's not a
Mhm.
deficit. Doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means they're asexual. But they still might also be open to and enthusiastic about having sex with you. Let's say the ace partner is sex repulsed, where even the thought of sex is very, very difficult for them and they are not open to doing it. That can lead to a little bit more tension, right?
Mhm.
Especially if the allosexual partner really wants to engage in sex. There you can explore other forms of intimate energy exchange, right? Other ways that you can bond and collaborate and explore a sort of non-sexual intimacy. This is where something like kink might come in, right? Where maybe rope plays a sex role for the allosexual partner, right? Or maybe sensual massage, or maybe uh, co-writing poetry. You can get creative with it. There's
Mhm.
all sorts of
Yeah.
ways to intimately collaborate, right? Now, if it's the case that one partner is like, no, I really, really want sex, like in a conventional sense. I want genital stimulation and contact, and the asexual partner is sex repulsed. That's going to be much more of a challenge,
Mhm.
right? That I mean, I'm not going to say that's a sort of a gross incompatibility, but that's going to be much more of a struggle than the previously mentioned cases, right? And that's
Yeah.
when the couple would have a real honest discussion about priorities and also perhaps even about monogamy and non-monogamy, right? So it's never a good idea to open up a monogamous relationship to non-monogamy in order to save the monogamous relationship. It's kind of a recipe for failure. But if you have one partner who's like, look, I have sexual needs, I love my asexual partner, but my asexual partner is sex repulsed, they might talk about rebooting their relationship in a non-monogamous framework, um, and recognizing that just because you have a partner doesn't mean that partner should be obligated or expected to fulfill every single one of your needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So lots of words on that, but it's a really good question. It's just a very complex set of answers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and
Mhm.
I think you answered that really well. I really enjoyed hearing your answer. All right, so I have a comment that I'm going to share, and then after that, I've got another question. All right, so Bo says, vital discussion. I had an ace partner for 6 years, and when they were open about it, our relationship would often be seen as illegitimate. They were also interested in sex every so often over the years, especially as they went through affirmative care.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we do as a culture, we talk about heteronormativity, which centers heterosexuality and treats anyone non-heterosexual as in some way defective or deficient. We've got cis normativity. There's also what's called allonormativity, which is the centering of the allosexual perspective and experience. And that includes the centering of allosexual relationships. So that if either party is asexual, there's sort of this idea that it's not a real relationship, right? If
Mhm.
there's no sex happening, you're just friends. And I think the way that we undo that is through those of us who have the privilege of being vocal, focusing on representation, using opportunities like Ace Week to center asexual relationships and asexual partnerships and asexual intimacy and all of those things. Because with that increased visibility, we're going to see an erosion of that stereotyping of illegitimacy, right? It's also worth noting, yes, affirming care when you go through like gender transition, that can do a lot to your experience of your own sexuality. um, it can shift your levels of sexual attraction, and it can also shift who you're sexually attracted to. Side note, there's some fascinating research that is given some evidence to show that even pre-medical transition, so only social transition, no hormones, no surgeries, sometimes people's orientations still change, right? And that
Interesting.
and one of the potential explanations is as we are relaxing into an affirmed state of self-acceptance, we are allowing ourselves to experience things that have been attractions all along, but prior to transition, we didn't let ourselves recognize as attractions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yes, yes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put up our next question. Okay, this one is from Joan. Okay,
Yeah.
so Joan is working with a patient, female, 30 years old, religious upbringing, no dating during high school and college, never had a heterosexual relationship, no masturbation or exploring body or genitals. How to differentiate between being truly asexual versus lack of education or experience with self or others. Where to go with this in therapy?
Yeah, a really good question, right? Because sometimes, someone has no opportunities for experience. Someone, I'm saying, they grew up in a repressive environment where the there was no permission to explore sexuality, and as a result, they've internalized that lack of permission. So they might present as someone who is effectively asexual. They might be presenting as, celibate in this case, right? The difference here would be whether or not, so here's how I would think about it. When they put on an asexual hat and when they think of themselves and they say, I am asexual, I don't experience sexual attraction toward other persons. Does that help them interpret their past experiences? Does it help them navigate their present experience? And does it help them project into a flourishing future? Does it help them synthesize that past, present, and future into a comprehensible and meaningful narrative? If so, that's a label for them. That's a lens for them. That's helpful. It's an affirming way of understanding their experiences. If, however, when they're like, no, I don't think I'm actually asexual, I I want to feel sexual attraction, or I feel things that I think are sexual attraction, but I feel like I'm just not letting myself because of my upbringing. Then you can deconstruct that a little bit, right? And you can also try on both hats, and you can kind of spend a little bit of the conversation here, a little bit of the conversation there, in order to kind of see what helps them reach that state of affirmed self-understanding to the highest degree. Right? Yeah, it's tricky because like asexuality is in a lot of ways it's defined in terms of a negative, right? There isn't like a lot of positive presentation of asexuality in the sense of like science to look for that show you that someone is ace, that we can use as like positive identifiers, right? But yeah, really good question, really good case.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. I also wanted to put up another comment from
Mm-hmm.
Bo, and I really liked this one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Bo says, we used to have a bracelet system: red, not today; yellow, neutral; green, want sexual interaction. I love that.
I love that. The traffic light system for consent and expression of interest, I think is fantastic across the board. And I'll share, I was amazed. I went to a conference recently that used the traffic light system for the name tag lanyards. And if you had a
Hmm.
green, it meant please approach me
Yeah.
and strike up a conversation with me. And yellow was, read the room, proceed with some caution. Not because I'm mean, but maybe because I'm a little, like
Yeah.
a little more. And red is like, I'll approach you, like, give me some space. And I just think that was such a beautiful little addition, so that you could see. And the green was like an invitation,
Yeah.
and if you had red, that might mean you'd initiate the contact with the people wearing green, and so on and so forth. I love, once we take consent and like subtle notions of consent and tools like the traffic light system and we normalize them in all sorts of contexts, we can transform so many of our spaces in such a beautiful way.
Yes, yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I know that's beneficial even working with children and teaching them from a young age about consent, things like that are so helpful, like such a good tool.
Yeah.
All right, so let me go to our final question. Okay.
Mhm.
So, our final question: how can we best support members of the asexual community?
Yeah. Listen to them, believe them, right? If you think you don't know any asexual people, you probably do. If you know 50 people, you know at least one asexual person, right? And you all know me. So now you know one. So listen to them and trust them, right? We might go in skeptical and be like, well, you're not really asexual. No, trust people about who they are, right? That's step one. And then two, be mindful of that force I mentioned earlier, allonormativity. It's everywhere in our culture, right? I watch a lot of reality dating shows. I love trashy reality dating TV, but it's so cisnormative. It's so heteronormative. It's so allonormative. It's this idea that if you don't want to have sex with someone or with anyone, that's somehow broken, right?
Mhm.
You're less than. And we'll throw in another one, what's called amatonormativity, which is this idea that everyone should either be in or want to be in a committed, long term, monogamous romantic relationship.
Mm.
So, cis, hetero, allo, amatonormativity is the centerpiece of every reality dating show, even the queer ones, I'd say. That's a big topic, but
Yeah.
notice that. Notice the way that these forces of social conditioning are perpetuated and bolstered through the stories that we tell and engage with.
Yeah.
Notice it and name it when you see it. Notice it in the ways that you've internalized it, right? When you're worried that someone isn't really asexual, they just haven't met the right person yet, notice that internalized allonormativity, name it. And each time you notice it, maybe reaffirm your commitment to further center asexual voices. That's going to help not just the asexual community, but it's going to help all of us because it's going to give us a more nuanced, deeper, and broader understanding of sexuality, period. I'd also recommend pick up some books. Angela Chen's book, Ace, What Asexuality Teaches Us About Desire, something in the meaning of sex. I don't remember the subtitle, but it's Angela Chen, Ace. Great book. Check it out. Follow Yasmin Benoit on Instagram. Follow AVEN, the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network, started by activist David J. Follow Aubrey Lancaster, Ace Sex Education. Get on Instagram. Follow Ace Dad Advice. These are all great accounts that you can easily find. Follow them and start having this like as part of your regular diet of content so that
Mm-hmm.
you're absorbing it. That's going to help you decenter like compulsory allosexuality from your own life. That's going to help decenter it from your community. If we're all doing that, we're going to see pretty big cultural change. You know, many hands make light work. So if we all work
Yeah.
on our own internal biases, we shift the culture.
Yes, yes. And I was going to ask you for like resources, so you already got ahead of me on that one.
Yeah,
I was going to yeah, I was going to say that we can put the resources in the chat later, and that you can have a reference for anybody who's watching. Maybe you're watching later on,
actually,
and
if
you
you go
can.
to the Sexual Health Alliance Nymphomedia blog and you scroll back a post or two, I put up a post on Monday about ACE Week and how we can erode allonormativity. And all of the resources that I just mentioned are mentioned in that article with links. So maybe we post that
Beautiful.
and that'll have
Yes.
everything people need.
Yes, beautiful. Oh, I see another question. Just a
Mhm.
moment.
Let's see.
All
Uh,
right, Lee.
yeah, do you want to read? Do you want to go ahead and read the question?
Okay, so Lee, would you be open to a SME and articles written? Yeah, sorry, I cut out for a moment. I
Oh, yeah,
froze.
no worries, no worries.
Okay, are we caught up now?
I think we are. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, good. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Would you be open to a SME and articles written about asexuality, and or are there topics you would like to be tapped as a SME for? What does SME stand for?
I believe it's subject matter expert. Though correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Cool. Okay, just wanted to clarify. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bo, let us know if that's not what you meant, but yes, love it.
I would say I am absolutely open to being included as a subject matter expert for articles about asexuality. And while we're here, you know, so I am gender, sexuality, relationship diversity content specialist. So if anyone wants to collaborate or have further discussions on issue of trans issues, queer issues, issues of gender minority status or erotic minority status, people in the kink community, or people with alternative relationship structures like various forms of non-monogamy, this is my bread and butter. And if you ever want to talk more about it, please feel free. You know, you can send a follow or a connection request on LinkedIn or send me an email, and I would love to chat more and see what we can build together.
Love it. And Bo said yes, SME subject matter expert. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, love that. And I also want to mention too that Sexual Health Alliance also offers specialty courses in kink, non-monogamy, problem sexual behavior, and those are have really great information for anybody interested in those specific topics.
Absolutely, absolutely. I co-facilitate the Kink Inform certification with Midori, and it is an amazing class. I absolutely love getting to do that, and we got a really great cohort, and we're going to be launching another one soon. So stay tuned for updates on that.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions before we sign off? Now is your chance. Go ahead and type those in and we will get your questions answered. I know this originally was supposed to be a 30-minute event, but I mean, great conversations are always welcome.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions for today, we can get ready to sign off. Any closing thoughts, Lee?
Oh, I'm just really grateful for all the questions and for the engagement that we got here. It's heartening. I think, like I was saying, this is such an important topic and such an under discussed topic. So seeing people show up with these good faith questions,
Yeah.
it just gives me hope. And I think just the growth that I've seen in the public eye of the asexual community with representation on Heartstopper, representation on on sex education, the Netflix show, increased representation in novels and books, increased discussion both in venues like this and in like clinical trainings. It's really great to see the growth that the field of human sexuality and the storytelling we're doing about human sexuality, see the growth that it's going through. It really does my heart good.
Yes, and I feel like we are so fortunate at Sexual Health Alliance to have an expert like you here, like on our team, to talk to us about different topics like this. We're really fortunate.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Michelle, for like setting this up and facilitating and having this great discussion. I really appreciate you.
Anytime. If there's any topics that anybody listening is interested in that you'd like to know more about, you'd like to have us do a LinkedIn Live on a certain like topic or area of interest, just let us know. Send us a message, leave us a comment, and we would be happy to do our best to accommodate that.
Hmm.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to sign off for the day. I hope everybody has a lovely afternoon, evening, wherever you're from. If you're watching us on the replay, make sure you follow us on all of our social media. You can see Lee's wonderful face on our social media and reels and things like that. So follow us Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, X. Where else are we? Did I forget? Obviously, LinkedIn.
I think we're on Pinterest. I forget.
Pinterest, we are on Pinterest. Yes, so feel free to follow us, engage. We are a friendly bunch. If you have any questions about our certification programs, you can find us on sexualhealthalliance.com or email us at shacertifications with an S at gmail.com.
Hmm.
All right. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.